Hi, so now we're ready to begin. We're going to start with the bonnet. So that's this part of the rabbit, and it is number 7 in the directions. So the directions actually start with the face, and I followed the directions the first time I did this. And the face, you actually do the face or the head, stuff it, and then close it. And then when you went to assemble it, they said put the bonnet on the head, and if it doesn't fit, stuff it more. But I had already closed up my head, so I was fine because my head fit in my bonnet. But I'm going to do the bonnet first, and then we'll do the head second so that we can make sure when we stuff the head, it all fits appropriately. So go ahead and grab your yarn and your hook. And if you're using fingering weight yarn, which is what I'm doing, you should have an E hook. If you're using DK, I would recommend probably an F. And if you're working on Worcester, then I would go up to a G. So let's start with the bonnet, which is direction number 7. I think it's a couple pages in. So make yourself a slip knot so that you can get your yarn on your hook. And then you're going to chain 2. And in this very first chain, you're going to do 6 single crochets. So that's 1. You're going to go back into that same space and do 2. Oops. It's kind of hard when there's not much to grab onto. You're going to do 2. Back in the same space and do 3. Take your time. Back in the same space and do 4 single crochets. Back in the same space, we're going to do 5. And back in the same space for number 6. So you've got 6 single crochets. You kind of make a little circle. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This white is our first one. So now you're going to go on to round 2, and each one of these single crochets from round 1, you're going to put 2 single crochets into each stitch for a total of 12. So the first one's kind of hard to grab sometimes with your hook. So just use your finger to get the legs on. 1, 2. So you're going to do 1 single crochet in that space, and you're going to go back in and do the second single crochet. Move over to the next stitch. You're going to do 2 single crochets in this stitch. So that's number 3 and number 4. Then you move to the next stitch. You're going to do 2 in that. That's 5 and 6. Move on to the next stitch. You're going to do 7 and 8. Moving on to the next stitch, you're going to do 9. And then back in for 10. And on the last one, you're going to do 2, and that will be 11 and 12. And we're back to where we started. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 single crochets. So now for round 3, you're going to do a single crochet in the stitch, and then in the next stitch, you're going to do 2. So you're going to alternate 1 single crochet, 2 single crochets, all the way around for a total of 18. So in this first stitch, we're going to do 1, and the next stitch, we're going to do 2. So that's 2, 3, and then moving on to the next stitch, we'll do 1, which is 4. Moving on to the next stitch, we're going to do 2 in here, so that's going to be 5. Go back in for 6. Move to the next stitch is going to be 7. Moving on to the next stitch, we're going to do 2 here, so that's going to be 8 and 9. Moving on to the next stitch, we're going to do 10. Moving on to the next stitch, we're going to do 11 and 12. Moving on to the next stitch, we're going to do 13. Moving on to the next stitch, we're going to do 14 and 15. Moving on to the next stitch is going to be 16. Moving on to our last one, we're going to do 17 and 18. So now you've completed round 3. Now you're going to move to round 4. We're going to do another increase row. So you're going to do 3 single crochets, and then in the 4th stitch, you're going to do your 2 increases, your 2 single crochets. That's, I'm sorry, round 4. So you're going to do 2 single crochets, and then you're going to do an increase for a total of 24 stitches. So in here, the first stitch, you're going to do 1. Then you're going to move to your next stitch, and you're going to do 1 in there for number 2. And then in this next stitch, we're going to put 2. So that's going to be 3. Go back into the same stitch for 4. And now we're going to do 5 in the next stitch. And then you're going to do number 6 in the next stitch. This one we're going to do 2. So that's going to be 7. Go back in for 8. And now you're going to do 9 in the next stitch. Move to the next stitch for 10. And now we're going to do 2 in this one. So that's going to be 11 and 12. Moving on to the next stitch for 13. Moving on to the next stitch for 14. We're going to do 2 in this one. So that's going to be 15 and 16. And then moving on to the next stitch is 17. Moving on to the next stitch is 18. Moving on to the next stitch, we're going to do 2. So that's 19. And then we're going to go in again for 20. Moving on to the next stitch for 21. Moving on to the next stitch for 22. And then we're going to do 2 in this stitch for 23. And 24. So round 4 is done, and we'll have 24 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and this last one here is 24. So now we're moving on to round 5, and you're going to do 3 single crochets and then your increase. And you're going to repeat that for a total of 30. So if you'd like to use a stitch holder to mark the beginning, so you're going to do 1 stitch here, 1 single crochet in this stitch, and then you're going to do 1 single crochet here for number 2, and then I put a stitch marker in that first one we did. So that would be this stitch, which was the beginning of the row. Now you're going to do the next stitch, you're going to do number 3. And now in this one, you're going to do 2. So that's number 4 and number 5 in the same stitch. Now you're going to do just 1. So that's 6. Moving to the next stitch for 7. Moving to the next stitch for 8. Moving to the next stitch for 2. So that's going to be number 9. And number 10 in that stitch. Needed a little bit more yarn. Now we're going to do 11 in the next stitch and number 12 in the next stitch and number 13 and then 2 in this for number 14 and number 15. And then we're going to do number 16 in the next stitch, number 17 in the next stitch, number 18 in the next stitch, and then this is going to get 2. So number 19 is going in there, and number 20. And then we're going to do 1 stitch here for 21, 1 stitch here for 22, Move to the next stitch for 23. Move to the next stitch for 2. You're going to put 24 and 25 in that stitch. And then you're going to move the next stitch for 26. The next stitch for 27. The next stitch for 28. And the last stitch, we're going to put 2 for 29. And 30. And you see we're back to our stitch marker. So now we've done round 5. Round 6, you're going to do 4 singles in your increase. And round 7, you're going to do 5 singles in an increase. Round 8, 6 singles in an increase. And round 9, 7 singles in an increase. So why don't you go ahead and do all that, and we'll meet for row 10.